You wake to the pale, hesitant light of a Dublin morning in the 13th century, filtering in through the uneven wooden shutters. The air inside your small room feels cool, with the faint smell of last night's peat smoke still lingering in the timbers. Outside, beyond the latch and the low step, the quay road waits, not a firm road as you might hope for, but a stretch of churned earth, patched with straw and glistening with last night's rain. You sit on the edge of the bed for a moment, listening. Somewhere down toward the river, you hear the dull, soft sound of water moving slowly against the quay walls. Closer, there is a faint creak, the sound of a cart beginning its slow morning journey, followed by the distinctive wet pull of a wheel from the mud. These are not jarring noises. They are part of the rhythm that signals the city is waking. The smell from outside reaches you next, a blend of the river's briny tang, the must of damp soil, and the more homely scent of hay drifting from a nearby stable. There is no urgency in the air, only the knowledge that soon the street will fill with the day's traffic boots, hooves, wheels, and the endless exchange of goods and words. When you open the door, the light spills in fully. It's not bright, just a thin wash of gray that settles over everything. The street directly in front of you is a patchwork of surfaces, shallow puddles that mirror the pale sky, darker stretches of wet earth, and scattered planks where someone has tried to make passage easier. A fisherman passes by, his shoulders hunched beneath a heavy sack that leaves damp patches on the coarse wool of his tunic. His boots are thick with yesterday's mud, and each step he takes adds to the slow churn of the street's surface. You nod in quiet acknowledgement, then watch as he disappears toward the river's edge, where gulls wheel and cry above the moored boats. A small boy trots past in the opposite direction, balancing along a plank set across one of the deeper puddles, his arms spread for balance, and his boots slap lightly against the wet wood. In the stillness of the morning, the sound carries. You know from experience that by midday, these planks will be dark with use, their surfaces slick from 100 hurried crossings. The air holds a certain damp weight that you feel in your clothes and hair. You draw your cloak a little closer and take in the slow movement of the street. A woman shaking straw from a sack to cover the worst of the mud outside her doorway. A dog sniffing at the edge of a puddle before deciding against a drink. The faint drift of chimney smoke mingling with the mist rising from the river. The quay road is not a place to be hurried. It demands you watch your step, notice the ground, and accept that each day it will leave its mark, sometimes only a few flecks on the hem, other times a pattern of dark splashes up to the knee. You take your first steps into it with care, your boots making that familiar softened sound as they meet the damp earth. You close the door behind you, feeling the weight of the latch settle back into place, and glance down at your boots. The leather is stiff from yesterday's soaking, the seams darkened where the water has crept in. You shift your weight and hear the faint creak of the stitching, as though the boots themselves are bracing for another day in the mire. On the low stoop, your hose are already showing faint stains from the step you took earlier. The wool clings lightly to your legs, still holding the memory of the damp night air, despite your efforts to dry them by the hearth. The smell of lanolin lingers, warm and faintly oily, mixing with the tang of the morning mist. You adjust the hem of your tunic so it sits well above your knees, gathering the fabric in one hand. It is a simple precaution, but one you've learned through countless mornings like this. Better to lift it now than spend the evening scrubbing out stains that will only fade, never vanish. The street greets you with a low chorus of sounds. Somewhere down the lane, a merchant's voice carries, soft and deliberate, not yet the full volume of market hours. A pair of gulls wheel above, their cries sharp against the muffled world below. Water drips steadily from the eaves of the house across from yours, falling into a small, waiting bucket that rings faintly with each drop. You step forward, the ground giving slightly under your weight. The mud here is more than just surface slick. It has a depth to it, a slow resistance that catches your boots and holds for a heartbeat before letting go. You find the firmer patches by instinct, angling your steps toward the straw scattered across certain door fronts. Passing the neighbor's house, you see her stooped in the doorway, hair tucked into a faded scarf, hands busy twisting the last of a bundle of rushes into a mat. She glances up, her expression one of shared understanding. This day, like so many, will be a battle between your footing and the street's stubborn pull. The air is thick with moisture, carrying scents both pleasant and less so. The faint sweetness of hay drifts from somewhere behind you, while closer at hand, a sharper, less welcome tang rises from the gutter where runoff has gathered. The surface of the water there trembles with each droplet falling from the roof above, sending tiny ripples toward the street's center. Ahead, you spot the first length of planking, laid out in a narrow strip over one of the worst patches. The boards are uneven, their grain darkened by water and wear, but they promise a short stretch of surer footing. You slow your pace, planning your approach not because it is difficult, but because there's no reason to rush. In this city, the mud will always wait for you. You approach the first set of planks with the care of someone who has seen too many mornings ruined by a careless step. They have been laid across the street in a crooked line, the ends resting on whatever ground seemed firm enough at the moment of placement. Some boards are warped, others splintered along the edges, but together they form a narrow raised path over a stretch of deep muck. Your first footfall makes the plank bend slightly under your weight, releasing a faint creak that seems to echo louder in the quiet morning. Beneath the boards, the mud glistens in irregular patches, darker where water has pooled and lighter where it has already begun to absorb into the earth. The surface swirls faintly when something, perhaps a rat, stirs beneath. A woman comes towards you from the other end of the planks, her skirts gathered high in one hand, a woven basket resting in the crook of her other arm. She doesn't look up. Her eyes stay on her footing, her pace steady and unhurried. When she reaches you, you step aside onto a patch of straw to let her pass. The straw shifts under your boots, its sweet, dry scent, a brief contrast to the dampness all around. Once she has gone, you return to the boards. They carry you over the worst of the muck, though you can feel the faint stickiness rising through the soles of your boots. In the gap between two planks, you glimpse the pale reflection of the sky trembling in a puddle below. A single droplet falls from the edge of your cloak and disturbs the surface, sending tiny rings outward until they dissolve back into stillness. Midway across, a boy darts past you from behind, leaping from one board to the next, with the careless agility of someone light enough not to sink if he falls short. His boots slap the wet wood, sending a fine spray outward. He lands safely on the far side, grinning to himself before disappearing into a side alley. Reaching the end of the path, you step down again into softer ground. The suction sound greets you instantly, that slow, pulling note that marks the street's claim on every passerby. You lift your foot carefully, avoiding the deepest ruts, and glance back once at the planks. They already bear new marks, small flecks of fresh mud, faint outlines of boot soles, and a thin sheen of water creeping along the grain. From here, the market is not far, though the street between still promises more hazards. You settle into a measured pace, letting the rhythm of your steps and the damp air carry you forward. The lane narrows, its walls drawing closer as you make your way toward the river end. Here, the air feels heavier, not just from the damp, but from the unmistakable tang of the tanner's work. The smell drifts long before you reach the source, a sharp, sour blend of soaked hides, lime, and something faintly metallic. It clings to the back of your throat, even as you breathe through your mouth. You know the yard is just beyond the next bend, hidden behind a timber fence patched with mismatched boards. The ground tells the story before the fence comes into view. Darker streaks of wet earth lead downhill from one spot along the wall, feeding into a shallow channel cut by years of runoff. The liquid is cloudy, pale brown in some places, almost gray in others, carrying slivers of bark and unidentifiable scraps toward the nearest gutter. You slow your steps, pressing closer to the opposite wall. The stone here is cool and slick beneath your fingertips, the mortar damp with the seep of last night's rain. Your boots skirt the outer edge of the flow, where the ground is still solid enough to hold you. The sound of the liquid is faint, a soft trickle that blends with the more distant rush of the river. From behind the fence comes the muted thud of a hide being turned over and the low murmur of voices. A gust of air carries the scent stronger for a moment, and you find yourself grateful for the light breeze that follows, carrying with it the fresher tang of river water. Just ahead, a man in a stained leather apron steps into the lane. His boots are caked in a pale residue that no amount of washing could fully remove. He adjusts the strap of a sack slung over his shoulder, nodding to you without slowing. You return the gesture and wait for him to pass before continuing along the wall, your eyes on the shifting line where wet earth meets dry. Once the channel's path turns away from the street, the ground begins to feel firmer underfoot. You let go of the wall and stretch your fingers, finding them damp from the stone. The air eases, the sharper scent fading until it is only a faint trace behind you. You glance back once to where the runoff glistens in the gray light, knowing it will remain as it is for the rest of the day, just another hazard folded into the rhythm of the street. The street widens again, where two lanes meet, and the ground changes from slick puddles to a deep, uneven churn. Here, every step must be judged before it's taken. The mud rises in ridges and dips, each holding its own shade of brown or gray, some streaked with straw, others glistening with fresh water that hasn't yet found the drains. A cart appears from the direction of the quay, moving at a slow, deliberate pace. The driver leans slightly forward, his gloved hands steady on the reins. The horse, flanks darkened with damp, lowers its head and steps with the care of an animal that knows these streets as well as any person. Each hoof lands with a dull, wet slap, sinking deep enough that the next step comes with a visible effort. The cart wheels cut into the mire, tracing deep arcs that fill almost immediately with water drawn from below. There's a low, sticky sound as the wood pulls free slow, almost reluctant. You find yourself watching the repeated pattern: sink, strain, release. Around the edges of the ruts, small flecks of mud jump free, landing in tiny dark bursts against already darkened boots and hems. On the far side of the crossing, another cart waits, its load covered with a length of faded canvas. The driver there seems in no hurry, letting the first pass through the deepest section before beginning his own crossing. When he does move forward, his wheels follow almost the same path, the ruts deepening with each turn. The sound blends with the muffled rhythm of hooves until all of it fades again into the damp air. A woman steps into view once the way is clear, her cloak hem tucked under one arm. She chooses her footing with precision, stepping into the firmer edges of the cart ruts where the mud is packed tighter. Her steps leave small impressions that quickly soften and lose their shape, swallowed by the moisture beneath. The street settles into stillness once more, the churned ground slowly smoothing as water seeps in from the edges. Somewhere nearby, a dog shakes itself dry, the sound of droplets hitting the ground echoing faintly in the wide space. You take your own measured steps forward, letting the rhythm of the place guide your pace. Nothing here is hurried, not the wheels, not the hooves, not the people who pass. The lane ahead narrows again, and a soft, irregular splashing reaches your ears. It is not the heavy, deliberate sound of hooves or wheels, but a quicker, lighter patter. Rounding the bend, you see a small gaggle of geese making their slow, confident way down the middle of the street. Their white feathers are dulled by flecks of mud, and their long necks sway in steady rhythm with their steps. The puddle they occupy stretches nearly from one wall to the other, its surface quivering under the weight of their orange, webbed feet. Each step sends tiny ripples outward, the reflections of the sky breaking and reforming in shifting patterns. From time to time, one bird dips its beak into the water, then lifts its head to swallow, droplets running down in thin silver threads. A woman follows behind, not hurrying them, but not letting them stray. She wears a faded brown cloak and carries a basket tucked into the crook of her arm. Her boots make heavier prints than the birds, the edges of her steps already softening in the water they share. The geese do not seem to notice her. They move as if the lane is entirely theirs. You keep to a strip of straw that lines the base of a wall, watching as the group draws nearer. One goose pauses just short of you, turning its head sharply so one bright eye fixes on you. The look lingers sharp, unblinking before it gives a short, low honk and resumes its march. The others follow without breaking formation, their ripples meeting and crossing over one another in the puddle behind them. Once they have passed, the lane feels quieter, though the puddle holds the traces of their passing, small swirls of silt, fading footprints, and the faint wake that still laps against the edges. A drop falls from the eaves above, sending a single set of rings outward across the surface until the water is still again. You step forward, the straw crackling softly under your weight, and carry on. Farther along, the sound of soft laughter mixes with the low splash of water against stone. You turn a corner, and see a cluster of children gathered near the gutter's edge, balancing on a low, narrow ledge that runs along the base of a building. The ledge is barely wide enough for a foot, yet they inch along it as if it were the safest place in Dublin. The gutter beside them carries a thin stream of rainwater, winding its way toward the drains near the quay. Bits of straw and leaves float along, spinning slowly as the current catches them. The children lean down from time to time, using sticks to poke at the passing debris, sending it into new paths. One boy, bolder than the rest, lowers himself onto the edge of the street and dips his bare toes into the cold water, drawing shouts and giggles from his companions. Their balance is a game, a contest, to see who can make it the farthest without touching the mud below. The rules are simple. A foot slipping from the ledge means a forfeit, usually a playful shove, or a daring dash across the worst of the street. You watch as one girl wobbles dangerously, arms flailing for a moment before she catches herself and steadies. Her smile is quick, proud, and she carries on as if nothing happened. Behind them, a door opens, and a woman steps out, her hands on her hips. She calls to the children in a tone that carries both fondness and warning. They pause, glancing at her, but she does not insist they leave. Instead, she shakes her head and returns inside, letting their game continue. The ledge stretches for only a short distance before ending abruptly at a gap where the wall changes from stone to timber. There, the children leap lightly onto a patch of wooden boards laid over a shallow puddle, their feet landing with a hollow clatter. The sound echoes briefly before the lane's damp quiet swallows it again. You follow at a slower pace, your steps careful but steady, letting the echoes fade behind you. You reach the frontage of the cobbler's shop by degrees, drawn less by the cut leather boot that swings above the lintel than by the promise of drier footing. Outside his doorway stretches a slatted walkway he has hammered together from narrow offcuts, lengths of fir and oak laid with patient spacing, raised on little blocks like a raft that has chosen not to float. The boards are the color of wet toast near their ends, dark where last evening's rain lingered. Through the slim gaps, you glimpse the street below brown water shifting slowly, straw drifting like tiny boats, a flattened nail winking once and disappearing. You pause at the edge to study the balance of it. Each slat is about the width of your palm, pegged with wooden dowels, its surface glossed by years of soles passing and pausing. A broom leans by the jamb, its bristles splayed to a fan. He must have swept at dawn. Faint tiger, stripes of broom lines still run the length of the boards already broken by the morning's first prints. From inside comes the sour-sweet breath of wet leather, mixed with the gentler sense of beeswax and peat smoke that slips from a back flue. You test the first step with the careful heel of someone who once slid here on a winter morning when frost turned the grain to glass. The board yields a breath and springs back with a small bird-like chirr. Underneath, you hear the soft sigh of water changing course along the gutter. 2 more steps and your body settles into the walkway's slow rhythm. Step, little gap, step again. Weight placed, wood replies. Another step, another answer. The boards feel modestly springy, just enough give to remind you that something crafted stands between you and the mud. The path narrows by the door, drawing your shoulder close to the frame. Inside, the cobbler bends over a last, shoulders bowed like a drawn bow, all held lightly between thumb and forefinger. He glances up with his hands, pausing the awl, weighing a seam by touch more than with his eyes. A short nod serves as greeting. You return it, and in that brief trade you notice what you always notice here. The lane's quiet depends on this bench. Without his neat stitches and patient nails, the street would claim half the city's footwear by week's end. A woman arrives behind you, hem pinched high in one fist, a tired shoe cupped in the other. She pauses on the outer edge of the slats, as if at the end of a narrow pier, then crosses, careful and exact, to set the shoe where he points. The sole gapes in a long, weary smile, edges fretted with grit. He does not sigh. He runs a thumb along the split, nods once, and says he will bind it by midday if the thread behaves. She thanks him and steps back to the stool at the far end to wait her turn with the scraping iron. You shift a little to make room, feeling the tiny changes in level where some slats have settled more than others. Between 2 boards, a bead of water clings, a clear round eye, then releases and falls into the run beneath with a sound too small to hear. Only the faint easing of the wood tells you it has gone. From below rises a smell that never quite leaves places like this. Old straw, soaked sawdust, a mineral hint like a wet stone warmed in a palm. For a handful of breaths, the walkway lends you a sense of being held slightly above the city's slow pull. At the far end, the stool sits square on the boards, both invitation and warning. Beside it lies the iron, its edge bright where boots have confessed their clotted weight. Scratches cross the stool's seat like shallow map lines, memories of knives and nails and hurried hands. You set your foot to the iron and draw it back. The scrape is steady and strangely pleasing, a ribboning hush that leaves a duller leather behind. You tap the loosened mud to the side with the toe and watch it tumble through the slats into the street's patient mixture below. A gust runs the lane and makes the hanging sign murmur against its chain. Somewhere behind you, a door answers with a brief thump. Fine dust flower light from rasped soles lifts, brightens, and settles. Across the way, a shutter opens to a face and closes again with the practiced calm of someone who has seen every morning the street can offer. Two apprentices round the corner, balancing a shallow tub between them. The water laps the rim, warm and faintly soapy. You step aside, and the board beneath you replies with a clean, elastic note like a plucked string. They carry the tub just inside. The cobbler half smiles without looking up. He takes the woman's shoe in both hands, bends it as if asking a question. The leather answers with a low creak. Thread hums through fresh punched holes, then bites with a muted tug. For a moment, you let the workshop's small orchestra settle around you. A hammer setting a nail with three gentle thuds, a rasp leveling an edge, the slow draw of waxed linen pulling two tired halves together. Outside, the street murmurs and puddles blink. Here, time moves in neat stitches. A boy sidles onto the slats with a bundle of rushes under one arm. He rests them on the stool, ties them with looped twine, and grins at the apprentices as if sharing a quiet plan. Later, someone will scatter the rushes over a bad patch near the market gate. For now, they sit like a polite promise, green tips beaded with leftover rain. The boy hops away, using the gaps as a game of stepping stones, and lands at the curb with a quick clap of soles on wood. You feel the board under you answer again, steady as breath. When you go on, you keep to the walkway until the last possible plank. The final board is shorter, its end cut on a slant where a knot once lived. Your boot rolls from wood to earth with a soft surrender, and the street receives you back without spite. Behind you, the slats keep their thin line against the day, a small bridge for a city that is mostly water in disguise. You glance at your soles. Better than they might have been. Not clean, never clean, simply better. It is enough to carry to the next doorway. A child streaks past and claims the path in quick, hopping strides. Laughter bright but contained, as if the slats themselves ask for quiet. He perches on the stool like a lord for a heartbeat, grins at the woman's mock stern look, and springs away when the cobbler clears his throat. You breathe once more the mixed smells tannin and wax, and wet wood lift your hem by a finger's breadth, and return to the lane where the ground, honest as ever, tugs at you to remember where you are. The boards fade behind you in the soft light, a neat idea meeting an untidy world. You carry the feel of them for several paces, the gentle spring, the careful spacing, the sense of being steadied until the street's patient insistence rises through your soles again. You square your shoulders to the gray, accept the slow pace it asks of you, and continue toward the market, trusting some other small mercy will be waiting there in another shape. The lane begins to open again, the building stepping back just enough to let in more of the pale morning light. Ahead, you notice a woman spreading something dark and loose over a wide, glistening patch of street. She moves with measured steps, tipping a sack from her hip so the contents tumble in small heaps. As you draw closer, the smell reaches you earthy and faintly smoky. Peat, the patch she's working on, is the sort of mud that swallows a boot in one step if you're careless. It lies in the natural dip between two slopes of ground, fed by water that trickles down from the lanes above. The peat falls in clumps at first, then loosens as she scatters it with the flat of her hand. Each handful lands with a muffled pat, dark against the wet sheen beneath. You slow your pace so as not to crowd her. Her cloak is a mottled brown, the hem marked with old stains that speak of many mornings spent doing the same work. Her hair, braided and coiled at the nape of her neck, glistens faintly with moisture from the air. She glances at you briefly, offering a nod before turning back to her task. The peat changes the texture of the ground almost immediately. Where it lands thickest, the sheen fades, replaced by a dull, fibrous surface that clings less to the foot. You test a step on one of these patches. The difference is subtle but real. The softness is still there, but the pull is gentler, the surface less eager to hold you. From somewhere nearby comes the distant sound of a hammer striking wood, slow and steady. A gull drifts overhead, its shadow passing across the street before disappearing behind a chimney. The woman works without looking up, her rhythm even. Tip from the sack, scatter with the hand, step forward. A small cloud of dark dust lifts now and then when a clump breaks apart, carried a short distance before sinking again into the damp. When the sack is empty, she straightens slowly, brushing her hands against each other to free them of the crumbs. Without a word, she hefts the sack over her shoulder and makes her way back toward a doorway half hidden by the curve of the lane. You step across the treated patch, hearing the slight crunch under your boots, and look back once to see the faint trail of her work against the broader sweep of the street. It will not last forever, perhaps, only until the next rain, but for now, it is enough to make the morning pass a little more easily. You draw your tunic hem a little higher as the lane narrows again, the walls pressing close enough that stray drips from the eaves have darkened the shoulders of many passers-by. Ahead, the ground dips slightly before rising toward the market, and the hollow is filled with a treacly mix of water and muck. Here, the street demands more care, not just for your boots, but for your clothing. On the far side of the dip, you see a woman pause to knot the edges of her skirts together, lifting the bundled fabric so it clears her knees. The knot sits neatly against her hip, leaving her hands free to balance a wicker basket on her shoulder. The basket's handle rests against her hair, which is covered by a linen coif. She steps into the muck without hesitation, the water parting around her boots in slow, rippling arcs. Her method is not unusual. You have seen men and women alike tuck hems into belts or twist them up in folds to keep the fabric out of harm's way. It leaves the legs more exposed, but it spares the hours of scrubbing that wet earth demands if it finds the cloth. For those without boots, the practice is even more important, though it does little to keep the cold from biting. A man passes you, having already waded through. His tunic hangs clean, but his boots are ringed with a tide mark of pale, wet mud. He stops briefly to lean against a wall, tapping one boot heel against the stone to dislodge a stubborn clump. The sound is sharp in the narrow space, and bits of muck fall in slow, heavy drops. You choose a careful path along the edge of the dip, where someone has thrown down a scattering of straw. The stalks are darkened from repeated use, flattened where many boots have pressed them into the ground, but they still offer a measure of grip. Each step there feels lighter, the suction weaker. As you reach the other side, you let your tunic hem fall back into place, brushing it with your fingertips to smooth the folds. The market square is close enough now that the smell of baking bread drifts faintly on the damp air, mingling with the ever-present scent of the street. Behind you, another group approaches the dip, laughter in their voices as they adjust hems and skirts, preparing for the same careful crossing you've just made. You smell it before you see it, a tang that is not quite the sea and not quite the street, a sharp salt that pricks the inside of your nose and settles on your tongue. You pass beneath a line of sagging shutters and come upon the cooper's yard, where half-made barrels lean like tired men against a fence of rough planks. The ground is mottled with pale patches and dark crescents, where hoops have been hammered into place. A low shed hugs the far side, and from within comes the measured ring of iron on wood tap. Breathe, tap steady as a heartbeat that belongs to timber and heat and patience. By the gate, a shallow pool has gathered where brine spilled the evening before. It lies gray-green, filmed with a sheen that catches the dull daylight and turns it faintly silver. Little threads drift upon it, shreds of herb or leaf, softened by long soaking, so that the puddle seems to carry the memory of fish and preservation, even as it sits motionless. Around its edges, the earth has whitened into a brittle crust like frost, except this frost does not melt. It crunches when a cartwheel presses it, then turns to paste and climbs the rim so the wheel carries the street away a finger at a time. You slow your steps, because brine is trickier than clean rain. It looks tame and lies flat as any puddle, yet it has a sly way of slicking a sole and then holding on to whatever it touches. Better to give it the respect it asks for. You angle toward the fence, where a thin sill of stone keeps a strip of ground a breath higher than the rest. Your shoulder brushes a stack of staves. They smell of green wood and smoke, with a little bite of iron, where a hoop has rubbed them bright. The curve is already in them, plain to promise a circle before the hoop makes it true. A cooper steps from the shed as you edge past, a compact man with broad wrists and a smear of pale dust across his cheek. He holds a hoop as if it were a giant's ring, easy in the hand only because he knows exactly how it will behave. He nods once, the morning's quiet kind of greeting. Behind him, an apprentice feeds a small fire under a steaming trough. The steam carries the warm, wet scent of soaked oak, almost like bread if you stand still and let the day be kind for a moment. You pause at the lip of the pool to study it. The surface wobbles a little, as if remembering the splash that made it. A straw sliver glides across, touches the white rim, and stops as though the salt has caught it by the ankle. Your reflection is only a smudge wearing a cloak. When a drip falls from the eave and strikes the water, your smudge shakes itself apart and returns again as if nothing has changed. The city does that to you too. Shakes and returns, until the rhythm itself is the comfort. There is a gap between a leaning barrel and the fence, just wide enough for a boot. You take it, stepping onto the stone sill. The stone is slick but honest. It tells you at once how it means to behave. You slide a hand along the staves for balance and feel the plain marks beneath your fingers, smooth and damp. Farther along, the stone lifts half a thumb and gives both feet a steadier purchase. You breathe out, the worst of the brine now to your left. On the yard floor, a hoop lies where someone changed his mind mid-task. It glints with a dull iron calm. Beside it, a hammer rests head down, its handle darkened by many palms. You can almost feel the yard's work in your own arms. The pull to widen a hoop, the careful tap to seat it, the warming of wood so staves will bend a finger's width without complaint. Work like that is a kind of walking, one small coordination after another, until the troublesome curve accepts its shape. The apprentice comes out with a ladle and skims the trough. Steam rolls off in white folds and drifts toward the lane, thinning as it meets cooler air. He pours a careful line of hot water across a set of staves held in a cradle to coax them toward a circle. The water runs off the end in a soft patter and disappears into salted dirt, leaving darker streaks that will soon pale to match the rest of the yard. Two fishermen arrive, pushing a hand barrow, the weight clear in the set of their shoulders. The cooper meets them at the gate. Few words pass. This is the sort of trade that prefers nods and small tilts of the head. They lift a tight-lidded barrel together and give it a practiced rock. A narrow bead of brine squeezes from the chime and falls in 3 bright drops to the ground, each one a tiny coin of light that goes dull as it lands. The cooper wipes the trickle with the back of his hand and presses the hoop an inch farther down with his thumb, listening with his skin more than his ear. You wait while they work, your weight balanced on the stone. Beyond the pool, the brine has made a lace of white along the lane's center. A delicate pattern your boots will scatter into soft powder. You lift your hem a finger higher out of habit. The air tastes faintly salted even without opening your mouth, as if the morning itself has been seasoned. At the far edge of the yard, a bottomless barrel stands like a collar for a beast you cannot see. Sun breaks the cloud for a heartbeat, and the inside of the staves glows the color of weak tea. The light goes again. Everything returns to useful gray. A dog noses from behind the shed, gives you an appraising look, decides you are neither a threat nor a treat, and wanders to lap at the puddle's edge. One doubtful lick persuades him otherwise. He trots off with the resigned expression of a creature that has tasted the town's ideas and declined to adopt them. You come at last to a stretch where cartwheels have churned the brine thin and even. The surface still looks dark, but it grips better. The sound beneath your boots changes from shy slip to quiet confidence. You let your hand leave the staves and roll your shoulders, as if you have set down a small burden, the burden of measuring every inch of footing. Behind you, the apprentice laughs at something the cooper says, bright for a moment, and then swallowed by the shed. The hammer takes up its speech again. A gull perches on the roof, and watches with the indifferent wisdom of creatures that live at the edges of human plans and eat well there. The pool by the gate holds its small, dull mirror to the sky, and the sky answers with a pale sliver between clouds. You move on toward the market, carrying a dusting of salt on your boots like a quiet souvenir. The lane tilts away from the river by finger widths, then hands, then the reach of your stride. The brine smell lingers for a dozen breaths and then loosens, replaced by bread and smoke, and the damp wool scent of people gathering. The city passes your attention from one texture to the next stone. Earth, wood, water, each with its own suggestion for how your feet should behave. You listen with your soles and find the pace that keeps you upright and unhurried. At the corner, you look down once more. A crisp ring of white clings to the welt of your left boot, where the crust kissed it. You brush it with a thumb, and it powders into the air, leaving the leather dull and honest again. The cooper's yard is already shrinking behind you into the larger hush of streets that know this drill as well as you do. You breathe through your nose and taste only the ordinary damp, the common air. One more patch past, you think. One more lesson in walking a city that asks for patience and pays you back with safe footing. One careful choice at a time. The lane bends sharply to the left, and just beyond the turn sits the low front of an alehouse, its timber frame leaning slightly as though tired from too many seasons of damp. The step outside is cut from a single slab of stone, worn into a shallow dish in the center, where countless heels have paused. This morning, it is dry, a small miracle in a street that holds on to every drop it can. You take the step as a brief refuge. The stone is cool beneath your boots, but the firmness of it is a relief after the soft give of the street. Leaning one shoulder against the doorpost, you reach down and lift each foot in turn, knocking the soles together to shed what clings. A few dark clumps tumble down and roll to the edge, where the street quickly reclaims them. The door is open just a crack, enough for the scent of warm malt to slip out into the gray air. Inside, you can hear the muffled scrape of a bench being shifted, the dull thud of a cask being set into place. Someone hums a few low notes, tuneless but steady. It is not the full bustle of midday, just the quiet readiness of a place that will soon fill. Across the way, a man in a green cloak is doing the same as you, perched on a high doorstep with one boot off entirely. He turns it over in his hands, inspecting the heel with the frown of someone weighing whether it will hold for another week. A small knife glints briefly as he scrapes away a hardened edge of mud, sending it into the gutter below. The street here is a touch drier, though still patched with slick spots, where the morning's runoff collects. A pair of women pass, their skirts lifted slightly, laughter spilling between them as they pick their way around a shallow puddle. One carries a clay jug cradled in the crook of her arm. The other holds a bundle wrapped in linen, its corners darkened with moisture. You shift your weight, enjoying the moment of not sinking, not slipping, simply standing. The sound of boots in the street is constant, but softened by the damp, a steady, unhurried murmur of feet going about their business. Somewhere farther along, a gull gives a sharp cry, answered by another from the quay. When you step down from the alehouse threshold, the ground receives you with its usual gentle pull. A faint rim of moisture marks the edge where stone meets earth, but your boots find their way easily. Behind you, the door creaks a little wider, letting the warm smell of malt and yeast follow you for several paces before the street's cooler air swallows it whole. The market's sounds begin to carry into the lane long before you see the stalls. But before the square opens up, you pass through a narrower stretch where the air smells unmistakably of fish. The calls of the mongers rise above the general murmur, each voice cutting in short bursts to catch the attention of anyone passing. The source comes into view quickly, a row of tables set along one side of the street, each covered with shallow wooden troughs. The troughs are filled with water, their surfaces constantly in motion as fish flick within them. Now and then, a small splash sends droplets into the air, catching the dim light before they fall back to the boards or the street below. The mongers stand behind their stalls, thick aprons tied high, their hands quick and sure as they lift a fish for inspection or slide it into a buyer's sack. They speak over the noise of the water, pitching their words to carry even when the gulls above add their own clamor. Behind the tables, barrels lean against the wall, their rims darkened with brine. A faint wetness runs from them toward the gutter, tracing a thin path through the mud. You step carefully between two puddles at the edge of the row, the ground here slick with both water and the fine scales that glint like silver dust. A monger calls to you with a quick nod, lifting a fish in one hand as if to tempt you. You return the nod but keep moving, your eyes drawn more to the rhythm of the work than to the goods themselves. A boy darts out from behind a stall, carrying a small bucket sloshing with water. He sets it down near a trough, plunges in a hand, and tosses a splash across the fish within. The water spills over the edges, adding fresh ripples to the puddles underfoot. A dog, patient and hopeful, waits nearby, nose lifted toward the smell. The sounds here are layered. The slap of water against wood, the sharp calls of trade, the soft shuffle of feet avoiding the worst of the wet patches. You navigate along the narrow strip between stall and wall, boots finding what firmness they can. The air is cool and damp, carrying the tang of the river along with the scent of scales and salt. By the time you leave the fish row behind, your boots are flecked with pale specks that will brush away easily enough once dry. The street widens, and the sharper scent fades into the broader mix of the market ahead bread, wool, and the earthy hum of the damp city. You reach a place where the lane stops pretending to be a road and becomes, for a few paces, a thought stretched over water. A drainage ditch crosses the way narrow, dark, and confident its banks glazed with a damp shine. Over it, 3 boards make a bridge, 2 lengths deep, held by nails that have learned patience. A rope, rough and pale, runs waist-high from post to post, a hand's worth of steadiness. You pause before stepping on. The planks carry the soft gloss of rain and use. Each grain line holds a thin thread of water. One board bears a shallow split at the center, too small to frighten, well placed to encourage care. Below, the ditch keeps a low, quick talk. Roof water, eave water, the offerings of every gutter in the neighborhood. Leaves spin where the current eddies. A reed taps the surface as if counting. You take the rope, it yields, and then holds. Your first step lands on the near plank's outer edge, the wood cool and a breath slick honest, if treated as such. Your second step finds the center seam where 2 boards meet, and you shift a finger's width inward, a habit earned on less kind mornings. Through the gaps, air rises with a damp earth sweetness, touched with iron and straw. From the far side, a man approaches with a yoke and 2 pails. He does not lift his eyes from his boots. This is a place where eyes serve feet. You back to the threshold and let him cross. His steps are short and sure. The pails lick their rims. The planks bend a hair, then rise when he is gone, as if exhaling politely. When the way is empty, you go again. A bead runs along the rope and taps your knuckle, colder than the air, a reminder to keep your attention. A small wind travels the lane and lays a skin of ripples on the ditch. The sky's reflection shivers, gathers itself, and holds. The bridge gives a quiet creak where a nail negotiates with damp wood, no complaint, just terms. Halfway, you pause to listen. The bridge has its own music. Rope against palm, the tiny cry of grain when weight slides, the mild patter of drops falling from undersides into the water below. Farther off, a gull scolds the river. Nearer, a latch lifts and sets. The ditch carries the neighborhood's decisions and is good enough not to comment on any of them. A boy leads a goat to the crossing. The boy is resigned. The goat is philosophical in a louder register. You stand where you are and offer the rope slack. One hoof tries the board and withdraws to think about it. The second attempt leaves the hoof there. The others follow with expressive clatter. The boy keeps the rope loose, wise boy, and together they cross, the boards answering with a patient chirr. On the far bank, the goat remembers it always intended success. You move again. The last plank bears the shine made by many heels, turning for the step down. You choose the center and let your ankles stay straight. Your boot rolls into compacted earth with the soft sound of a small promise kept. Behind you, the ditch resumes its speech, indifferent to your departure. It prefers an audience that passes. This side of the crossing, someone has spread a ribbon of gravel, modest and grateful under the gray light. You walk it with the relief of stumbling into a sentence with fewer commas. A woman ahead balances a tray of small pies on one hand and gives you a nod that says the gravel behaves. You answer by putting your weight on it. From a side alley, a porter emerges with 2 stacked baskets and a broad strap across his chest. He studies the bridge, shortens his stride, and goes over in steps the size of his breath. You watch because his lesson is yours. Smaller, closer, steadier. He vanishes into the day's errands, a moving agreement with the city's small bargains. You glance back. From here, the bridge looks like 3 neat stitches across a dark seam. The rope bows a finger's width at the middle. The end knot is fat with old rain. A droplet gathers there, rounds itself, and falls, joining the ditch's patient tally. The sight pleases you the way a well-mended thing does not perfect, simply attended to, which is often better. You walk on, but the bridge follows in your manner for a dozen steps. Your feet keep the measure it asked. Calm, close, sure. The lane widens. You lower your hem, then lift it again where a shallow pool occupies the precise spot the ground forgot to raise. A cart somewhere beyond the bend groans like a door. The smell of damp straw arrives a heartbeat later. At a doorway, a woman rinses a clay jar, with ditch water fetched upstream where it runs fresher. She swirls, pours, and taps the rim with a nail. The thin stream hurries down the stones to the crossflow you just crossed, grateful for company. A broom leans by her jam, bristles splayed and drying, ready to coax the gravel back into its line after the next careless wheel. Another traveler steps onto the bridge, the green-cloaked man you saw at the alehouse, his heel newly decided upon. He takes the rope, favors the safe side of the seam, and proceeds without news. That is the gift of this little span most days. Nothing happens. In a city fond of wet surprises, nothing is an underrated luxury. You breathe out and let your shoulders drop. The market's warm scent begins to reach you: bread, yeast, a hint of smoke. Still, you carry a quiet gratitude for 3 boards and a rope, for the nail that creaked but held, for a place that returned your steps in the same number it borrowed. It is a small thing, likely forgotten by nightfall, but your souls will remember. Your hem, too, which stayed on the correct side of the water. You adjust your cloak, test the next patch of ground, and find it willing. The city promises nothing about the street ahead. It offers only this assurance learned at the bridge. Where the earth falters, someone has taught wood to speak across it. You listen for that language in your stride and go on, content to translate as you walk. The lane draws you toward a low open space, where the ground has been worked over by more than just feet. Here, a pair of men sweep with long-handled brooms made from bundled twigs, their strokes slow but deliberate. The brooms are dark from repeated soakings, the bristles splaying where they meet the mud. Each sweep pushes a thin wave of muck toward the center line of the street, where it gathers into a sluggish ridge. One man works in broad arcs, his broom whispering across the surface before meeting the resistance of something heavier, a stone, perhaps, or a stubborn clump of straw. The other moves in shorter strokes, pausing every few paces to stamp the bristles against the ground, shaking loose what the mud has claimed. Between them, a patch of cobbled stone begins to reappear, its edges slick but visible. The sound of their work is distinct. The soft drag of twigs, the faint slap when wet bristles meet resistance, and the muted squelch when they lift the broom to set it down again. Neither speaks much. A nod now and then passes between them, the kind that says both men know the work will be undone by the next rain, and yet it is worth doing for now. You stand aside as they draw closer, stepping onto a shallow lip of stone that borders a doorway. From here, you can see the uneven rhythm of their progress, one sweeper leading, the other following to catch what is left behind. The smell of damp earth rises sharply where the mud is disturbed, mixing with the faint tang of something metallic from the wet cobbles beneath. A boy trots past carrying a small bundle of kindling, hopping lightly over the ridge of muck in the center. The sweepers pause just long enough to let him pass, then resume their pace, the brooms cutting narrow paths through the mess. A rivulet of dirty water runs alongside their work, slipping into a drain hidden beneath a warped iron grate. When the space between them and you is clear, you step down from the doorway and cross the newly revealed stones. They are slick underfoot, their surfaces smoothed by countless years of feet and wheels. The firmness is a pleasant change, even if the footing asks for care. A few paces on, the stones vanish again beneath the familiar churn of wet earth. Behind you, the sweepers keep at their rhythm, their work leaving a faintly tidier street in their wake. Ahead, The market square draws nearer, its noise rising above the steady whisper of brooms on mud. The lane spills you gently into the market square, where the sound changes at once. Here, the air carries the layered voices of many trades, the measured calls of merchants naming their goods, the low hum of bargaining, the occasional laughter that breaks free from a knot of conversation. The square itself is broad enough to let the pale daylight fall without much interruption, and the openness makes the damp feel lighter, though the ground is still worked into thick, dark patches by the morning's traffic. You pause at the edge, letting your eyes travel over the scene. Stalls stand in uneven rows, their canvas covers sagging where last night's rain left its mark. Between them, the street is no less muddy than the lanes you've left behind, but the constant passing of feet has churned it into a smoother consistency, like a batter mixed until it no longer clumps. Boots, hooves, and the rims of small carts glide more easily here, though they still carry the city with them after every step. A cluster of sellers tends to baskets of vegetables, carrots, with their tops still clinging to soil, onions with paper skins flapping in the breeze, and bundles of herbs tied in tight knots. The smell of crushed greenery rises from the ground where a sprig has been stepped on. A little farther off, a woman rearranges a table of coarse cloth, shaking out one piece so it falls neatly across the boards. You take a few steps into the square, choosing a path that follows the shallow ridges left by a recent cart. The ridges have collected a thin film of water, reflecting the pale shape of the cathedral spire beyond the roofs. In places, straw has been scattered to soften the slipperiest stretches. The stalks are flattened now, their golden color muted by the damp, but they still give a slight grip beneath your boots. From one corner of the square comes the warm scent of bread, carried on a faint breeze that tugs at cloaks and skirts. People gather there in a loose half-circle, waiting their turn as a baker pulls small loaves from a covered basket. A woman in a red shawl passes you with two under her arm, steam rising faintly from the cloth that wraps them. You move on at an easy pace, letting the square unfold in its own rhythm. Everywhere, the mud is part of the day trailed into doorways, marked on the hems of traders' garments, patterned in small crescents and lines where people have paused, shifted, and gone on. There is no complaint in it, only the quiet acceptance that here, as in the lanes, the ground will always leave its mark. You would not expect it here, between the cart ruts and the flattened straw, but the scent finds you anyway, sharp, warm, and almost cheerful against the damp morning. Garlic. It comes as a quick, bright thread pulled through the cloth of mud and river and wool, and for a few steps it seems to lift the very air. You slow, not because the ground demands it this time, but because your nose insists on ceremony. The place of it is ordinary enough, a shallow, trampled pool where boots have argued all morning about which direction is wiser. In the middle lies the reason, a burst bundle of cloves, papery skins kicked thin as onion silver across the surface. Some cloves are whole, still wearing their thin coats. Others are crushed into pale suns with brown centers, their juices mixed into the street's mixture. Every passerby who stamped and slipped here has ground them finer, until their perfume rises like a good idea that refuses to be ignored. You stand at the edge and breathe. The scent is not the heavy sort that lingers over pots and hearths. It is fresher, quick, and singing, the way garlic first speaks when a knife has just met it. It glides through the wet air and makes companions of things that do not often seem friendly. The wet leather smell, the peat-tinged smoke, the whisper of cold from the river. For a heartbeat, even the mud seems to shrug and say, "Very well, let us smell like supper on a feast day." A woman arrives, carrying a basket strong enough to suggest she believes in buying for more than today. She takes 2 careful steps and looks down. Her mouth tightens, not against the scent, but against the loss. You can see she had planned a broth that might have pleased a tired household. She crouches, pinches 2 unbroken cloves from the edge the brave survivors, and wipes them on her cloak hem with a small, decisive gesture. Into the basket they go, quick as a blessing tossed back into a church from the doorway. The papery skins make their own small weather. A breeze comes down the lane, and the skins answer by lifting and settling, as if trying on the idea of flight and finding it unnecessary. One lands against your boot and clings there, giving your soul the look of having grown a small scale. You brush it away, and it drifts to join its fellows in the shallow pool, where it floats like a boat meant for a very short voyage. 3 paces on, the ground remembers its old tricks. A boy tries to skirt the pool and misjudges, landing with both feet in the center where the garlic has turned the mud into something almost persuasive. He makes a face that would be called tragic if his friends were not laughing. He lifts one foot, and the street tries to keep his boot as a souvenir. The garlic answers with a sudden sneeze of perfume, as if applauding the drama. He frees himself with dignity, tattered but intact, and goes on at once. Because boys are the first to know when the audience has moved on. From a stall nearby, a trader notices the mess and shakes her head. You can see the trail back to her table. A short stretch of scattered skins, a torn scrap of twine, a damp patch that suggests the morning's rush came one heartbeat too quick. She reaches beneath the board, produces a shallow scoop, and begins lifting the worst of the cloves from the water, dropping them into a cracked bowl. Not to sell again. Not even she would dare that. Only to tidy the story the street will tell about her today. A little order against the city's appetite for muddle. You test the edge of the pool with your boot. The rim is passable if you place each step on the narrow ledge where someone has thrown a few handfuls of straw. The straw is dark and flattened, but it takes your weight with good manners. You move along the curved edge, the way a reader might trace a thumb along a margin line. Each time your sole presses down, the garlic rises again. Not as a shout now, but as a quiet. Here I am, do not forget me. It is a curious comfort. This kitchen, smell in the open. It makes you imagine warm things you cannot see, a pot behaving itself above a steady fire, a piece of bread laid out with more care than it needs, a hand tipping a pinch of salt into a palm to measure it with an eye that knows. The market is full of such imagined hearths. Each sent a thread running back to a room where someone is waiting for a door to open and boots to be set by the fire. A dog wanders up, nose first, body later. His tail gives a polite wave. He snuffs at the pool, considers the garlic as a possibility, and sneezes once, surprised to find a spice in a street that usually serves only plain earth. He chooses a safer smell down the lane and goes after it with new purpose. The way dogs recover from disappointment better than saints. At the pool's far side, a man with a staff approaches, tapping lightly as he walks. He pauses, measures the width, and chooses the plank someone has laid there, a single board with a knot like a small sleeping eye. He sets his staff ahead, taps the sound out of the wood, and crosses in 3 sure steps, the board giving back a quiet reply each time. The garlic rises again at the touch of his boot and then settles, as if reassured that manners have returned to the day. You have crossed, but the scent follows for a dozen paces, clinging to the inside of your breath. You pass a woman selling bunches of herbs, parsley dark as a shadow, leeks with their white shanks kissed by soil, and a few small cords of onions braided neatly. She laughs softly when she catches the garlic on you, and lifts a braid with 2 fingers. A small offer, half a joke, half mercy. You smile, shake your head, and thank her without words. Not today. It is enough to have been reminded. Beyond the stall, the ground lifts, and the mud grows more obliging, not dry. No, this is Dublin, but willing to let you place your feet and keep them. The garlic thins into the larger breadth of the square. Warm bread, wet wool, wood smoke, a thread of fish that has come farther than it expected to travel today. You look back once at the small bright patch, where the cloves still shine like coins pressed into soft wax. The breeze comes again, and the skins answer with their light theater, rising and falling until even they are folded into the lane's patient mixture. By midday, a new story will have been stamped over that place. The market forgets and remembers in the same movement, but your boots carry away a hint of something more than earth, a small feast for the nose, a reminder that even streets given to mud can surprise you with a line of spice. You tuck the thought away as if it were a clove slipped into a pocket, where it will scent the rest of your walk more kindly than the city strictly requires. You go on, the ground under you now a little firmer, your stride easy again. Around you, voices rise and fall, a soft music that needs no tune. The square opens wider, and the sky attends to its slow brightening, pleased perhaps to have assisted in a brief alchemy. A puddle, some skins, the press of many feet, and a smell that turned the morning toward something like hunger. The ground announces itself a moment before your feet find it. darker, shinier, and stirred into a slow, thick slosh by every cart that is insisted on passing. The lane narrows just here, pinched between a stone boundary wall and the jutting face of a timbered house, and the narrowing squeezes all the morning's water into a single persistent place. You stop, measure the span, and accept the old answer. You take the wall. The stones are large and irregular, set with a mason's practical eye and a patience that still lingers like the breath of the hands that laid them. Their faces are not smooth. They bear shallow hollows and shy bulges, where rain has thought about staying and decided to move on. Here and there, mortar has retreated a finger's width, making little shelves for moss to keep its soft shop. The moss looks pleased with itself, which is more than you can say for the mud. You place your palm against the stone, testing the bargain. It is cool as always and damp in the polite way of things that never go entirely dry. Your hand slides a thumb's length and stops, not skidding, only settling. You think of the wall as a companion who does not chat, who does not hurry, who offers only weight and steadiness. Some friendships are built on exactly that. Your first step goes to the sliver of ground nearest the wall, the narrowest strip that still deserves to be called earth. It gives, but not far, and the suction is gentle, like a child tugging your sleeve to ask if you might look at something. You lift your hem another finger, set your second foot, and keep your palm where it is. The stone is the difference between leaning and falling. Along the upper courses of the wall, someone years ago scratched a crude fish into a flattish stone, the sort of mark that happens when a pocket knife is forced to become a chisel. The fish is all backbone and optimism, swimming nowhere in particular, but determined. Below it, nearer your shoulder, the wall carries other stories. A faint black line where a torch once smoked on a wet evening, a pale bloom of lichen that has taken the shape of a little continent, an old nail-hammered level with the face, its purpose forgotten, its stubbornness undiminished. You move in measured half-steps, letting your hand be a second foot. The wall's joints tell your fingers what your eyes cannot, which stones stand proud, which bow back, which offer a ridge your palm may trust, while your boot finds the next patch of earth that will not imitate a hungry mouth. You trade weight between leather and skin, street and stone, and the exchange works because you do not rush the counting. The mud speaks in slow syllables. It is not the dramatic slurp of a deep rut, only a careful wet exhale that follows each rise of your heel. You answer by placing the next step along the wall's shadow, where less sky reaches and the ground stays, if not firmer, at least more modest in its ambitions. Your shoulder brushes a line of ivy, its leaves cool and slick, their green made brighter by the gray of the day. A single droplet departs a tip and kisses your wrist, as if in thanks for passing. Opposite, a doorway sits a little below street level, its lintel dark, its steps submerged in a thin shine of brown water. Someone has laid 2 bricks there to gain a dry inch for entering. The bricks are red once you notice them, a polite rebellion against so much gray and brown. As you edge by, the door opens a hand's breadth. A hand reaches out with a broom, and with unhurried strokes, coaxes the water away from the threshold like a householder negotiating with the tide. The door closes again. The bricks keep their inch. A man approaches from ahead, cloak lifted to the knee, eyes pleased to see you already hugging the wall, so he need not choose between courtesy and dryness. Take the join by your hip, he says, in the tone of giving directions to a friend who can see the same map. You do, shifting your palm to the seam, he means. It offers a shallow channel for your fingers, a little river cut by old work, clean enough to refuse to be slimy even now. You say thanks in the language of nods, and pass each other with the smallest rotation of shoulders. The wall accepts you both, and then asks for neither of you again. Here the stones are colder. You can feel the change in them, as if the wall keeps its own weather. A small crack in one block holds yesterday's rain, an eye of clear water no wider than a coin. Your fingertip brushes its rim and comes away chill, so that for a moment your hand smells like cold and grit, a scent you cannot name but know. You wipe it on your cloak and the cloth darkens to a deeper quiet. Beyond the crack, the mortar flares into rough bumps, where an earlier repair was made with less care than love. Your palm rides lightly over those ridges. The bumps give you confidence. They are the knuckles of the wall, and you press your weight to them with the ease of a companionable grasp. Underfoot, The ground tries a small trick pretending to be firm for one stride, and then making a soft, sly sink on the next. Your hand keeps the ledger honest, and you do not stumble. The lane's sounds arrive damped but present. A cart somewhere to your left, talking to its harness. A woman laughing once and then again, the brief rill of water finding a lower idea. Close by, a drip forms at the edge of a stone above you, grows contemplative, and falls. You watch it break on the mud. It makes a tiny crown that lasts a heartbeat, then folds back into the common mix. Crowns are brief things in this city. A child's chatter approaches and halts. Small boots wait for a grown decision. Take the wall. A voice behind him advises without fuss, and two lighter palms come to rest on the stones beneath your own, not touching you, only joining your method. The child's breath makes little clouds that scramble off and vanish. He giggles at his own steam, then advances, keeping time with the rasp of his sleeve against the rock. When they are past, the wall holds the faint warmth of where they leaned, as if stone enjoys being useful. At shoulder height, the ivy thickens and hides a niche cut into the wall, long ago a shallow square, the size of a loaf, perhaps once a place for a lamp on winter evenings. Today, it is a quiet grotto for damp air. A spider has left a web across its face, the threads strung like harp lines, beaded with droplets that make the web seem richer than it is. You admire the little orchestra and do not disturb it. The city is full of instruments that only play for those who arrive without hurry. Your boots earn a small reward, a lip of stone for 2 steps where the foundation projects a finger outward. The lip is slick, yes, but certain. You slide along it as you might along a sentence that knows where it is going. When the lip ends, the earth receives you again with fewer complaints than before. You press your palm once more to the stone in a deliberate farewell, and feel grit kiss your skin like a blessing invented on the spot. Past the narrowest place, the lane relaxes. The wall lowers to a waist-high run that looks content with mere duty. The mud thins to a patient smear that asks only for attention, not devotion. You let your arm drop and study your hand. A dusting of lime, pale against the lines of your palm. A smear of green where the ivy claimed a small tax. And the faint, clean scent that stone gives when you have asked it for help and it has agreed. You turn your hand once to the gray light and rub thumb and fingers together. The grit whispers away. Your shoulder loosens. Your steps lengthen to their ordinary measure. Behind you, the wall keeps its counsel, saying nothing about the people it steadied this morning, or the ones it let slide on a day when it had warned them and they chose not to listen. Walls are good at silence. A little farther on, you pass a gap where the wall has crumbled into its own small hill. Someone has stacked the fallen stones at the base in a cautious pyramid, as if promising to put them back when time allows. A sprig of something with tiny white blossoms has rooted in the heap and is making a seasonal argument in favor of delicate things. You listen, smile with half your mouth, and continue. The ground flattens under your boots. A rivulet runs beside you, clearer here where the slope quickens, and hurries toward a grate you can hear, but not see. The air smells of wet lime and clean moss, softened now by a thread of warm bread making its way out from the market's edge. You think, as people always do after such a passage, that perhaps the worst was not so bad after all. The lane has a way of teaching that lesson. That balance is mostly agreement between foot and ground, hand and wall, patience and the desire to arrive. You glance back once more. The tight place has already forgotten you. A man you do not know rests his palm where yours did, and finds the same steadiness you found, because stone is generous and has the memory of water, how to hold and how to let go. You turn forward again, lighter by the weight of a difficulty past, and wiser by a finger's breadth, which is as much wisdom as anyone needs for the next stretch of street. The lane bends once more, and with the turn comes a faint, uneven movement along the gutter ahead. At first, it is only a shifting of shadows where the water runs, but then the shapes resolve into the low forms of 2 dogs, nosing their way through the shallow flow. Their coats are a patchwork of street's own colors, black softened with brown dust, white smudged to gray where the mud has claimed it. They work side by side with unhurried purpose, the way experienced scavengers do. Every few steps, one lowers its head into the trickle, lapping at whatever it has found there. The other keeps watch, eyes darting to the movement of boots and wheels that pass. When they find something of interest, a scrap of skin, A small bone, a soggy crust. They pull it gently from the water and lay it on the bank for inspection. The gutter here runs more swiftly than most, fed by a slope in the lane. The water is no cleaner than anywhere else, but it carries its contents briskly, offering fresh possibilities with each moment. You slow to watch the dog's rhythm. Step, sniff, pause. The sound of dripping from an eave above marking the measure. One of them steps across the gutter to your side, shaking its paws in quick, sharp motions. Droplets scatter onto the stones near your boots, each one leaving a dark mark that lingers for a few breaths before joining the damp already there. The dog passes close enough for you to catch the smell of wet fur, sharp, familiar, almost comforting in its honesty. The second dog remains in the flow, its head low. It noses at the edge of a small bundle of straw caught against the grate ahead. With a sudden push, it frees the bundle, and the water tugs it forward. The straw drifts a short distance before catching again in another curve of the gutter. The dog loses interest quickly and moves on, sniffing at a darker patch where the current has slowed. A woman carrying a shallow basket steps past them without concern. She lifts her hem slightly to avoid the gutter's splash, her eyes on the lane ahead. The dogs shift aside politely, returning to their search once she is gone. You follow the line of the gutter for a few paces, your boots keeping to the firmer ground along its edge. The sound of the water is steady here, a soft running note that weaves easily into the morning's larger hum. The dogs trail behind you now, content to let the gutter lead them on. When you turn toward the square again, you glance back to see them pause at a bend, one drinking, the other watching the street. They look entirely at home, as though this narrow, muddy channel is as much theirs as anyone's, and in truth, it is. You step out from the lane into a stretch of ground that feels strangely generous beneath your feet. Instead of the usual churn of mud and water, the surface here is layered with gravel, a scattering of small stones that crunch softly with each step. The change is immediate. The suction is gone, the pull eased, and your stride grows naturally longer. The gravel has been laid in a wide ribbon leading to the heavy doors of the Guildhall. The building rises in solid gray stone, its doorway arched and flanked by carved posts that have seen enough seasons to take on the same weathered tone as the street. The doors are still closed at this hour, but the space in front of them is already claimed by the day's early comings and goings. You look down at the ground, noticing how the gravel shifts slightly with your weight, the pale edges of some stones catching the light. Bits of straw are scattered among them, worked in by boots over time, softening the overall look. There's a faint smell of dry dust here, different from the heavier scents of the wetter streets, though it's quickly overpowered whenever a breeze drifts from the market. A man stands off to one side, leaning on a long staff, his boots planted firm in the gravel. He nods to you, the easy greeting of someone who knows this is a rare patch of civility in the city's flooring. Behind him, a boy kneels to scoop a handful of stones into a small sack, perhaps for use in front of another doorway. He works quickly, glancing up now and then, as if expecting to be told to stop, but no one moves to chase him off. The sound of the gravel underfoot is a small pleasure, a muffled crunch that feels clean in contrast to the squelch and splash that have filled your morning so far. You pause midway across the ribbon, shifting your weight from one foot to the other, listening to how the sound changes when the stones settle back into place. At the far end, where the gravel meets the open square again, the surface becomes uneven, the stones thinning until they give way entirely to bare earth. A shallow rut there is already collecting water from the trickle of last night's rain. You step over it easily, your boots leaving the crisp feel of the gravel behind, and rejoin the softer, more familiar ground of the street. For a moment, you glance back at the patch in front of the Guildhall. In a city where most streets return whatever you give them in the form of mud, it stands out as something made to be walked without caution, a deliberate kindness underfoot. Then, the sound of the square draws you forward again, and the gravel, like all good things here, becomes part of the background. Near the center of the square, just shy of the busiest cluster of stalls, a patch of ground rises a little higher than the rest. Atop it sits an upturned wooden crate, and on that crate perch two musicians. They've claimed it as their stage, though, here. The stage is less for show than for keeping dry. One has a small harp tucked against his shoulder, the wood worn smooth where his fingers have long rested. the other cradles a pipe, its mouth darkened from years of breath. Both men wear cloaks pulled tight, their hems gathered high enough to keep clear of the square's churn. Their boots rest on the crate's slats, toes tapping softly in time with the tune they weave together. The harp's notes are light but sure, ringing just enough to rise over the murmur of the market without pressing themselves too boldly. The pipe winds around those notes, the melody unhurried, a pattern that sounds as if it might go on forever without needing to arrive anywhere. Passers-by glance their way, some slowing for a measure or two, others simply letting the music fold into the rest of the morning sounds. Beneath the crate, the ground is a quilt of trampled straw, flattened until it lies almost level with the earth. It's clear the musicians chose their spot with care. The rise keeps them above the worst of the damp, and the crate gives them just enough distance from the ground to preserve their footing. A small clay mug sits between them, not empty, but not close to full. A child edges nearer, drawn by the music. He stands in the muddied straw, head tilted, eyes fixed on the moving fingers. When the piper catches sight of him, he shifts the tune slightly, nothing dramatic, just a playful turn in the melody that makes the boy smile. The harp follows without missing a beat, and for a few moments the air between them feels warmer. The smell here is a mingling of fresh bread from the baker's stall nearby, and the faint resinous scent of the harp's wood. When the breeze shifts just right, you pause at the edge of the circle of sound, letting the tune settle in your ears. It seems to make the square's other noises, the bargaining, the footsteps, the clink of coins, blur into a softer background. When you move on, the music follows for a while, notes threading through the spaces between stalls. Even after the crate is out of sight, a phrase or two lingers, carried lightly above the market's hum before it's folded back into the day. The tune fades behind you, replaced by the steady shuffle of boots ahead. You follow the sound to where a pair of bakers are making their way through the square, each carrying a wide wooden tray. The trays are held high above shoulder level, balanced expertly on open palms and braced with the other hand. The loaves they carry are small and round, their crusts still darkened from the morning's oven. Even at a distance, you can see the faint haze of steam curling from them, vanishing quickly into the cool air. The smell trails behind warm, yeasty, and touched with the faint sweetness that comes from baking over peat. The bakers walk steadily, not fast, but with the certainty of men who know the square will part for them, and it does. People step aside without fuss, aware that to stumble into those trays would be to waste more than bread. The mud beneath their boots is no kinder here than anywhere else, but their footing is sure, their eyes fixed on the path ahead. A boy darts past, splashing through a shallow puddle just behind them. One baker glances over his shoulder, measuring the distance with a quick flick of the eyes, then shifts his grip slightly to steady the tray. The loaves don't so much as tilt. The boy grins, but gives them a wider berth after that. You step aside as they approach, moving on to a patch of trampled straw by a cloth seller's stall. From here, you can see the details. The tray's surfaces darkened and smoothed by years of flour and heat. The baker's sleeves rolled to the elbow, wrists marked faintly with flour that has become part of their skin. The loaves themselves are arranged in neat concentric circles, each one resting against its neighbor in a pattern that keeps them from shifting. They pass close enough for the warmth to reach you, brief but unmistakable, like the edge of a hearth's heat when someone opens the door on a cold morning. The smell lingers after they've gone, a soft reminder that not all burdens carried through these streets are heavy in the same way. You watch them weave through the rest of the square, the trays moving above the crowd like small floating islands. When they disappear into the shadow of a side lane, the space they've left seems just a little colder. You step back onto the muddied path, your boots sinking again into the day's familiar give, and continue on. The market breathes in slow waves, and into one of those waves comes the sound that always rearranges a crowd, the spaced, careful beats of a horse approaching. Not the clatter of hooves on stone, because today the square is more earth than rock. This is the soft, heavy punctuation of weight finding mud and giving it a reason to speak. You turn slightly before the animal appears, the way everyone does, as if the hooves send a polite announcement ahead of themselves. The horse comes through the mouth of a lane with the resigned magnificence of a creature that knows it is large and knows the ground is not impressed. Its coat is a plain, honest brown, darkened along the belly and legs where the morning has already had its say. Steam lifts in threads along the withers. The harness creaks a little, where leather meets iron, a quiet chorus that keeps time with the beast's breath. Behind, the cart rides low, its rim brushed by straw, and a few damp sacks that will be dry again by some happier afternoon. The front row of the market, those who always stand a touch too close to anything interesting, performs its usual dance. A straight line of bodies becomes a curved one, like a bowstring easing. People lean back by inches, not enough to admit they have misjudged distance, just enough to let the horse pass without becoming part of its mourning. You are close enough to read the hooves' intentions. They will land where they must, firm and certain, because hesitation is the enemy of staying upright. The first splash arrives not as a surprise, but as a confirmation. A hoof descends into a shallow pool, and the mud yields with a soft, rounded complaint. The liquid lifts in a generous arc and distributes itself with democratic fairness across boots, skirts, and the lower panels of a canvas apron. It is not a great shower, merely a courteous reminder from the street that it likes to be shared. The recipients look down with the collective expression of people who have been told an old joke well. A man in a blue cloak takes the blessing on the hem and does not flinch. He tips his head slightly, as one might to a neighbor, and steps back half a pace. A girl beside him gives a quick, bright smile of disbelief, then scrubs at a damp dot on her stocking with the side of her shoe, a motion both practiced and entirely futile. The horse continues, untroubled by the social ripples it creates, eyes soft under a forelock that has begun to clump in tidy, wet curls. You watch the hooves choose their way. Each finds a patch that will hold, presses, then leaves with that small upward pop that is the sound of the city letting go. The cartwheels follow, sunk to their comfort in the softened earth. A rope slips on a hook, corrects itself, and grips with a useful seriousness. The driver keeps a hand light on the reins and another on his knee, body leaning no more than he must to keep the balance the day requires. At the edge of the aisle, the baker's straw, trampled flat earlier, turns out to be a good idea twice in one morning. It catches part of the splash and converts it from a sharp starburst to a modest spat. Where the straw thins, the mud resumes its preferment for expressive gestures. A boy, emboldened by previous near misses, angles too close and collects 3 brown ornaments on his shin as a souvenir. He hops once not enough to be called a dance, just enough to mark the occasion, and then falls in behind the cart as if he planned it. The square adjusts to accommodate passage, then closes again like a slow eye after the cart goes by. In the wake, the ground is different. 2 deep, persuasive ovals where the front hooves landed, 2 more to match behind, and a double groove from the wheels, glossy for a few breaths. Before water remembers to pool, you step near one of the prints and feel the firmness at its rim, where weight has pressed the earth into something almost disciplined. For the next dozen steps, half the square will prefer those rims. Beside you, a woman shakes her cloak once, sending a neat constellation of droplets to the ground. She does it without irritation, a movement more akin to housekeeping than complaint. The small stars vanish on contact, absorbed into the larger, patient shine. The woman reties the string of her basket and resumes whatever errand briefly paused for the horse's arithmetic. The animal reaches a set of boards someone has laid to keep the worst of the churn from becoming adventurous. Hooves on wood make a different speech, a damp knock with a soft echo beneath, then the answering hush of the board settling back. The horse lowers its head and chooses the center, as wise beasts do. The driver clicks his tongue once, not a command, more a conversation. I see what you see. They cross together, boards bending the way old promises do, exactly as much as they must, and no more. On the far side, the cart noses past a knot of cloth sellers. One of them, anticipating a second round of flex, turns a bolt inward with a crisp flip so the good side faces away. The gesture is both thrifty and kind to the next buyer. Mud arrives anyway, nothing finds its target more faithfully. But now it lands on the uncomplaining edge. A small victory, earned by attention rather than luck. Wind travels across the square and lifts the horse's mane just enough to make a new shape of its neck. The smell that follows in the animal's wake is honest. Wet hair, iron, leather, a trace of oats that have chosen to remember themselves in public. It is not unpleasant. It belongs to the day the way the bread scent and the fish tang belong. each taking its turn in the market's gentle rotation of scents. You find yourself studying the splatter on your own boots. The pattern is oddly decorative, a spray of commas across the leather, as if the ground has added punctuation to your journey. You rub one mark with your thumb. It smears to a softer brown and becomes part of the boot's opinion of itself. It will dry there and flake later, and the street will collect it in due course. Nothing is wasted here. It is all merely borrowed. The horse pauses at the square's far exit, where the lane narrows between a wall and a shuttered door. It draws a long breath and lets it out, making a small cloud that goes nowhere in particular. The driver speaks to it in a tone nearly as low as thought. The cart leans as the wheels set into the first ruts of the next passage, and the hooves consider, then accept. A last modest arc of mud salutes the faces closest to the corner, not malice, only momentum, and then they are gone. Sounds dwindling to a memory your ears will keep for a minute longer than necessary. The front row reforms as if nothing happened. A man checks his purse. A woman returns to debating the size of a cabbage with its seller. A baker's boy threads through carrying a tray no lighter for the horses having passed. Two children step into the fresh hoofprints to measure their feet against a larger life, find the edges too wide, and giggle at the excess. The prints accept all comparisons with their usual calm. You walk on, using the wheel grooves as rails for a few steps, until they aim you where you already intended to go. The square hums as before, but a little cleaner for the horse's lesson in spacing. Your cloak bears 3 new speckles on the lower corner. Not enough to require thought, exactly enough to show you were present. Presence is what the city asks, in return for passage that, and a willingness to be decorated now and then by the weather underfoot. At the edge of the market you look back once more. The tracks are already changing, their sharpness blurred by half a dozen choices made by other boots. A gull arcs overhead and offers an impudent remark to no one. Somewhere, a hammer taps twice and then stops, pleased with itself. You adjust your hem by an inch habit rather than need, and step into the next stretch of ground with the calm of someone who has just been reminded how very little is personal when mud is the medium. The hum of the market fades as you angle toward a narrow side lane. Here, the noise is softer, but the ground speaks more plainly. Ahead, a merchant and 2 helpers are crouched around a tilted barrel, their sleeves damp, their boots pressed deep into the mud. The barrel has sprung a leak, a slow, dark ribbon of liquid threading its way toward the center of the lane. It's not water, the smell tells you before you're close. A tang of something sharp, fermented, perhaps ale or vinegar, rides on the air. The stream seeps across the lane's slope, curling into smaller rivulets that explore the ruts and depressions like fingers seeking purchase. One thread of it has already found the gutter, but another spreads toward a doorway where the ground dips lower. The helpers work quickly, not in panic, but in the quiet urgency of those who know how swiftly the street claims whatever it is given. One scoops handfuls of sand from a cloth sack, tossing them in a loose arc to intercept the flow. The sand lands soft and pale against the mud, darkening as it drinks in the spill. The other pats the sand into place with the flat of a board, pressing it just enough to make a ridge. The liquid slows, catches, and begins to pool instead of wander. The merchant tilts the barrel slightly, setting it into a shallow cradle made of other sacks. The leak becomes a steady drip rather than a small stream. He wipes his hand on his cloak without looking down, eyes fixed on the progress of the sand ridge. When the pooling threatens to overtop it, more sand comes, building the wall higher. You stand a pace back, feeling the faint tug of the spill's scent, a sweet sour note that seems almost warm in the cool air. The ground between you and the workers is slick now, the sand doing its work but not yet firm. You choose your steps carefully, moving to the side where a scattering of straw offers safer footing. After a few more minutes, the leak slows to nothing more than an occasional drop. The merchant nods once, satisfied, and the helpers begin gathering the extra sand back into the sack. The ridge remains, a pale, damp arc across the darker earth, marking both the path of the spill and the place where it was stopped. As you pass, you catch the briefest trace of conversation, not about the mishap, but about the weather, and whether the next load from the quay will be on time. The street keeps its disasters small when it can. The sand will be scattered and trampled before long, but for now it stands as a small, deliberate shape in a city where the ground rarely stays still. You turn back toward the main stretch of the square, where the buildings step aside just enough to let the sightline run long. At the far end, the cathedral spire rises in pale stone, its narrow point cutting upward into the gray. The spire casts a shadow that falls across part of the street, a cool band where the light seems to hesitate before it touches the ground. As you step into that shadow, the air changes. The damp feels a little sharper here, and the smell shifts to less of the market's mix, more of stone, lime, and the faint echo of the river's breeze funneled along the open space. The ground beneath is firmer than most of what you've crossed today. Perhaps the slope helps. Perhaps fewer carts pass this way. The mud is still present, but it lies flatter, more subdued, as though the spire itself presses it into discipline. People move more slowly here, not from caution, but from something like habit. A pair of men carrying a long timber pause to adjust their grip, each leaning the load against one shoulder while they change sides. A woman with a bundle of cloth rests her back against the wall of a shop, letting the shadow cool her face before she continues. The space feels like a place to breathe between errands. Your boots make a quieter sound here, a low thud with only a little stick in it. The light glancing off the damp patches is dimmer, softer, the reflected shapes of passing feet less distinct. You glance upward once the spire is too high to take in all at once from here, but you catch the glint of a weathercock shifting lazily in the breeze. A boy chases after a rolling hoop, its rim wet and shining as it spins through the shadow and back into the light. His laughter changes timbre in the cool air, brighter again once he's out the other side. A man in a brown cloak crosses the street in front of you, the hem of his garment brushing against the damp but picking up little. The ground here seems less interested in clinging. You walk the length of the shadow, the cathedral's presence steady above you even when you cannot see it. At the far edge, the sunlight returns without ceremony, the air warming by a subtle degree. Behind you, the cool band remains where it is, holding its quiet against the busier sounds beyond. You step back into the sunlit portion of the street, and the warmth feels like a slow hand settling over your shoulders. The change is almost immediate. The air smells faintly sweeter here, as though the light itself coaxes something gentle from the damp. The mud underfoot takes on a softer shine, its patches of water gleaming with the pale gold of the afternoon. Ahead, a washerwoman is wringing out a length of cloth over a wooden tub. Her arms move with the steady rhythm of someone who has repeated the task more times than she can count. The fabric twists under her grip, sending thin streams of water down to the street, where they join the irregular network of rivulets already gliding along the shallow depressions. A little further on, the cobbles reappear not in neat, complete paving, but as scattered clusters, as if someone once began the work and then stopped. Between them, the mud remains, but it is broken into irregular shapes by the stone. Your boots click briefly on the cobbles, then sink again into the softer earth, over and over, the sound and feel changing with each step. Near one of the clusters, a cat sits with all four paws gathered neatly beneath it, tail wrapped close. Its fur is dark and sleek, its eyes half-lidded, but you can tell it is watching the movement of people's feet. The cat chooses its moments, stepping forward only when the way is clear, pausing in the dry hollows between the stones, before slipping into the shadow beneath a cart. The air hums with a mix of small sounds, the plash of water from the washerwoman's tub, the quiet scrape of a broom against stone, the soft roll of a wooden wheel somewhere just out of sight. Overhead, a gull cries once and then is gone, the sound fading into the brightness. The street here is neither entirely mud nor entirely stone, a compromised space, perhaps, where neither surface has claimed victory. You trace your way along it, stepping where the cobbles give you an edge, then back to the earth when the stones vanish. The rhythm feels almost deliberate, a kind of slow weaving between textures, as though the street itself is teaching you how to pass through without hurry. The street narrows again, folding you between two tall rows of timber frame buildings whose upper stories lean toward each other. Here the light is dimmer, caught between the overhanging eaves, and the air carries a cooler weight. The mud underfoot is darker in shade, the moisture holding its color longer without the sun to dry it. Someone has laid a path of broken planks through the worst of it. They're not nailed down, just set loosely end to end, the edges irregular, some pieces warped from use. You test the first one before putting your full weight on it. It tilts slightly, but holds. Each board offers a brief reprieve from the slow give of the earth, but between them, the mud waits, patient and unchanged. A cooper works in the open front of a workshop to your left, the smell of shaved oak and damp hoops threading into the air. He pauses now and then to adjust his footing on the planks, shifting a half-finished barrel closer to the doorway. The sound of his mallet is muted here, absorbed by the narrow space. A little further along, an older woman in a gray shawl stands by a doorway, holding a wooden scoop. She tips it carefully, pouring out a thin stream of kitchen water into the gutter. It slides away between the boards, joining whatever other liquids the street collects before they find their way downhill. She watches it for a moment, then sets the scoop aside without hurry. Your boots make a mixed pattern of sounds, the low thud of wood when you step on a plank, the sticky pull when you step off. The contrast makes each texture sharper in your mind. Even as the rhythm lulls you forward, a breeze stirs between the buildings, carrying the faint scent of yeast and ash from somewhere unseen. At the far end of the narrow way, the boards give out entirely, returning you to the soft and familiar press of mud. The light opens a little again, but the memory of the shaded walk clings for a few steps more, like the lingering coolness after stepping from a cellar. By the time you turn toward home, the light has thinned to a quieter gray that makes edges softer and puddles seem deeper than they are. The street that leads to your doorway knows you well. It keeps its usual collection of shallow dips and darkened seams, as dependable in their small inconveniences as an old neighbor with a fondness for the same stories. Your boots carry a day's worth of the city, thin rinds of dried splash around the ankles, darker gloss along the welt, and a patient weight clinging to the treads. The doorstone waits like a good habit, a single slab set a finger's height above the lane, its surface worn into a shallow oval where generations have set their feet before entering. Tonight, the stone holds a film of damp, not quite a shine, only enough to turn the gray a tone deeper. You lift your hem, plant one foot on the slab, and feel the small relief of firmness rise up through your bones. Beside the jamb, where you left it this morning, lies the scraping iron, a flat blade with an honest edge, lashed to a stub of handle smooth from years of palms. It is no grand tool, but it knows more about this street than most people do. You pick it up and it greets your hand with the cool politeness of iron that has made peace with weather. A low stool leans against the wall. You nudge it into place with your shin and sit, letting your weight settle into the familiar wobble of wood that has learned all your shapes. You set one boot on the stone's outer rim, where the curve stays just high enough to keep the leather from bathing again in what you've come to remove. The iron meets the sole with a small, promising bite. You draw it towards you in a slow, confident arc. The sound it makes is the smallest of gratifications, half whisper, half rasp, like a secret being told properly for once. A ribbon of mud curls away from the tread and drops to the edge of the slab. You tap the iron, and the ribbon collapses into itself with a soft, obedient sigh. Scrape, tap, scrape, tap. The rhythm settles into your shoulders, untying knots the day has placed there. The first passes lift the thick, recent weight. The next find older seams that have hardened into thin ridges. The last gather what remains into a polite dust that the evening air will reclaim. You tip the boot and hook the iron into the creases where leather folds against leather. The mud there gives up reluctantly, unwilling to admit how easily it is persuaded by patience. From inside the house comes the smallest of domestic sounds, a cup set on wood, the creak of a bench shifting its opinion, the low hush of a log adjusting itself in the hearth. The smell that follows slips through the crack of the door, peat unrolling its warmth, a ghost of onion, and something green lingering from the pot, clean wool drying near the fire. You breathe slowly and let the scrape-tap rhythm stitch those scents to the present moment. A passerby lifts a hand in greeting without stopping. You answer with the nod that says both of you know what must be done before a threshold can be crossed. The lane has grown quieter, the market's louder threads pulled out of the weaving until only the soft bass line remains. Water finding the lowest thought, a cart complaining once and then deciding it can wait, the final comments of a gull who has run out of opinions. You switch feet. The second boot carries different news, one heel clogged, with a plug shaped exactly like the street's least favorite hollow. one edge glazed where it flirted with brine by the cooper's yard, a scatter of pale flecks that used to be someone's spilled flour. You read the day from your soul the way a sailor reads wind from a scrap of cloth held high. The iron translates scrape, tap, scrape. A darker curl falls, then a lighter one flecked with grit, then the thin scrape of leather itself telling you gently to stop. That's enough. You've reached the boundary between useful insistence and needless zeal. By the jamb sits a little brush twigs, bound into a company by a twist of cord. You take it up to finish the corners the iron cannot persuade, flicking gently along the welt and under the toe. The brushing makes a different music, a dry hush that calls to mind husks shifting in a sack. When you set the brush down, the boots look, if not new, at least reasonable. Not clean, but presentable to the room where firelight forgives much. You lean forward and thumb a fine line of silt from the seam where sole meets upper. The line breaks into a pale smile across your thumb and smudges onto the doorstone. You wipe it with the back of your knuckle along the slab's wetter edge, and the stone accepts it without remark. Doorstones are the most tolerant of companions. Around your feet, the day's collection has gathered in a modest crescent. Curls and crumbs of mud, a few blades of straw, a grain or two of grit that gleam like tiny stars before they subside into dullness. You take the flat of the iron and nudge the crescent toward the outer lip, letting it decide whether to leap to the lane or linger as a thin border that tomorrow's first foot will scatter. The doorstone bears the faint map of your efforts, darker in the center, lighter at the edges. A world in miniature where crossing means you leave a little weight behind. Rain begins without ceremony. You hear it first on the eaves, a patient tapping that suggests conversation more than weather. A moment later, it reaches the lane in small, circular arguments that widen and merge. The first of the drops pocks the little crescent you've pushed aside, returning it to an approachable pace. You smile at the thought that if you had waited a quarter hour, the street itself would have softened what the iron has now cut away. But then your doorstone would be a lake, and there's no sense in that. Timing is the compromise we make with places that prefer to be wet. You stand, giving each boot a final decisive knock against the slab's sounder edge. The note rings solid. The leather answers with a deeper tone. You tilt your feet to admire the modest shine the damp has given the uppers. It is the homely kind of gloss that comes not from oil or wax, but from being well used and then considered for a moment before being asked to work again. On the inner jamb hangs a rag dedicated to the border between outdoors and in. You take it down and press it briefly to the toe of each boot, not to polish, only to lift what the iron and brush have missed. The rag bears the city's colors in quiet stripes from earlier evenings, brown on brown, subtle as tree rings. You set it back where it belongs, a promise to yourself that tomorrow's return will meet the same simple welcome. The latch lift feels right in your hand. You open the door a hand's width, enough to let the warmth spool out and touch your cheeks. Before you step across, you give the stone one quick, affectionate glance, as one might give to a friend who waits without complaint. It has shouldered the day for you, gathered what you needed to shed, and held fast under your shifting weight. You set one boot over the sill, then the other, and feel the floorboards receive you, with the kind of patience only wood and home can practice. Behind you, the rain finds a steadier voice. It will wash the doorstone's crescent into the gutter, polish the slab's shallow oval a fraction smoother, and lay a thin sheen along the lane for morning to consider. Inside, the scrape-tap rhythm still hums in your arms, a lullaby learned from iron and stone. You hang the scraping iron on its nail, lean the stool back where it stands watch, and close the door with a soft push that leaves the city on the other side, quieter than you found it, but still very much itself. You latch the door, and after a few moments of quiet, open it again to lean your head into the evening. Darkness has not settled fully. It has only lowered itself like a shawl, thin enough that the day's last gray still shows through. From a peg beside the jamb you take the little iron-lipped lantern, its horn windows cloudy with age, and touch the wick with a coal pinched from the hearth. The flame fusses, then decides to live. A small circle of warm color wakes on the doorstone and reaches outward to greet the lane. You step back outside, holding the lantern low, as if introducing light to ground rather than to air. The rain that began as a tapping has grown steady, not hard, not insistent, just the kind that falls, because falling is what the sky has decided to do for a while. The lantern's glow rubs itself against the moisture like a cat, and the street answers with a soft, wet shine. In front of your doorway, the boards someone laid earlier in the season still hold their line. They have darkened to the color of soaked walnut. Along the grain, fine threads gleam where the lantern catches. You lift the lantern a touch and watch the light travel along the narrow walkway, waking each bead of water in turn. Every droplet takes its moment to be a star, and then yields it to the next. The boards are slick under your boot, honest about it, and the lantern tells you where the safer edges lie. You move slowly, not out of fear, but because a slow pace lets the night speak. The rain makes a small hiss where it touches the warmed horn panes. A puff of steam fogs the window and clears again as if the lantern is breathing. Below, the boards tick in their own language, the tiny complaints of wood that has drunk more than it would like, the soft answer of nails that will hold anyway. In the gaps, the water runs, with the humble purpose of liquid on an errand, from eave to board, from board to gutter, from gutter to ditch, from ditch to river, from river to wherever the river means to go. Lantern light turns the ordinary into ceremony. The rim of a shoe print becomes a ring of gold, dusted with slate. A nail head is a coin. A knot is a small dark eye. The puddle beside the walkway, which at noon was only brown and useful, now holds a fractured sky. You lower the lantern until the horn warms your knuckles, and watch the surface bow toward the light, as if obliged to be hospitable. Drops from the eaves stipple the puddle's skin. Each ring travels outward until another meets it, and the circles pass through one another without quarrel. 2 houses along, a shutter opens a crack. A hand appears, with its own lantern cupped beneath the palm, thumb crooked against the handle. For a few breaths, the 2 pools of light meet in the lane and make a brighter, overlapping shape, like conversation. The hand lifts, sets the lantern on a hook, and withdraws. In the window, a shape moves, then is still. Your own lantern answers by catching the wet edge of the threshold and making it look freshly coined. You raise the lamp and the boards ahead gather themselves into a path. Farther on, the walkway kinks around a barrel that was left as a promise to be moved. The curve gathers water along its inner edge. Your light pulls a narrow river of amber out of it. You decide to place your foot where the wood tells you to, not on the bright, not quite on the dark, but on the strip between, where the grain shows a duller thread, and the lantern's small sun is more suggestion than glare. The board gives under your weight and then sets its mind. From a roof peak nearby, a drip has grown disciplined, falling at a pace you could count all night if you wished. The lantern sets a bead on each drop as it falls, and for that instant, the drop owns 2 lights, the sky's faint leftover above, and your little hearth in hand below. The bead explodes on the board and becomes a fleck that runs to find its cousins. You tilt the lantern, and the fleck becomes a tiny tail of brightness that vanishes when it reaches the gap. A cat slips from under a cart and joins your progress for 3 measured paces, choosing the boards with the calm of a creature who long ago decided that dry feet are a reasonable ambition. In your light, the cat's whiskers take on a silver opinion, and its eyes collect your flame into patient coins. It looks at you as if to say that the night is a place for agreements rather than adventures, then steps into the shade beyond your circle and dissolves like a memory. You set the lantern on the board's edge and squat to rest your hand on the wood. It is not warm, but it holds a kind of kept heat, the temperature of things that have been touched by boots and hands all day, and now ask for nothing except time to forget. Your palm, so recently taught by the wall's rough counsel, reads a different text here. Ridges that were planed flat once and have since learned to rise, a shallow cup where 1,000 heels have turned, a hairline crack that has gathered a black seam of dirt and is proud of it. The water flees your skin in beads on either side. The lantern persuades the bead to glow until it decides to run on. Across the lane, the gutter slides by with the regularity of thought. Your light finds its surface and writes a bright stripe that keeps pace with nothing and everything. A leaf comes along and occupies the stripe for a moment, like a boat finding a current stronger than its oars, then spins away into unlit runnels where the world resumes being itself without an audience. Someone's laughter visits from up the street, softened by the wet. A door closes 2 houses down with a sound as gentle as a book being shut. The rain speaks to the eaves. The eaves answer evenly. The boards take dictation and pass the message on. You pick up the lantern and walk the remaining span with the measured steps of a person who knows that to hurry is to borrow tomorrow's weariness. At the last plank, where the walkway meets the slope to the gutter, a domed nail rises a thumb's width. In the day, it was only an annoyance. Now, with light, it is a polite bell that your soul rings if you forget your foot's shape. You don't forget. Your boot rolls to the earth. The lantern shows the slope in soft plains, the thin glacé of fresh water, the darker velvet where the mud is thicker, the pale thread where someone earlier dragged a stick to encourage the flow. You let your eyes follow that thread to the ditch, and then to the river beyond, felt rather than seen. You turn back once, because lanterns will have you turning back. The boards you crossed are now a ribbon of soft fire laid across a dark page. Every drop that lands upon them writes a brief character that the next drop edits and the next erases. You think of morning of gray sky and puddles, of straw pressed flat, of boots measuring patience, and you understand that the night is already beginning to write the clean surface tomorrow will scuff. You lower the lantern and shield it with your palm, so the flame doesn't taste the next kiss of rain too eagerly. The horn warms your hand, and the handle answers with the quiet oil of old metal. A breath of wind threads the lane. Your flame draws in and steadies. The world within your circle stays simple. Wet wood, small light. The sound of water writing its one long sentence toward the sea. You raise the lantern once more to read your own threshold from here, and it sends you back a gentle beckon, as if saying, "Come, the boards have done their work." The doorstone is waiting to listen to your souls. You go slowly, keeping the flame low, letting it polish each droplet that asks to shine before the night gathers it again. Night folds itself over the street in layers so thin you can see the shape of each beneath the next. The rain, steady but courteous, has settled into a pace that keeps the eaves occupied and the gutters content. You open the shutter a hand's width and let the sound come in, not a roar, not a hiss, just the soft counting of drops finding their places. The lane below gathers each note and sends it along, a quiet chain of small agreements leading toward the river. Inside, the room holds a warmer dark. Peat glows under its own breath, the hearth's light no longer bright enough to make decisions, only enough to remember them. Your cloak hangs from its peg by the door, a faint glisten tattooed along the hem where the day has told its story. Boots sit by the hearth, their soles clean enough to be trusted, their leather easing by degrees as the heat persuades it to forget the street. You lie back, the straw mattress answering with a soft, familiar shift. The wool blanket brings the day's scents closer. Smoke turned gentle, clean damp from the edges of your tunic, a trace of bread that lingered on your sleeve when you carried the loaf home. You breathe slowly, and the room breathes with you, wood easing, peat settling, a cup finding a quieter stance on the table. Beyond the shutter, the lane keeps its own bedtime. Boards dark as walnuts glimmer under thin curtains of water. The doorstone glows dully where the lantern touched it earlier and then left. A rivulet along the gutter carries a leaf, as if it were something that ought to be escorted. Somewhere, a rope creaks once, thoughtful as an old man shifting his knee. A dog shakes itself, tags the night with a brief sound, and decides the doorway where it began is also a fine place to end. You close your eyes and let the day recede in the order your body prefers. Soles first, grateful for the absence of pull. Knees, pleased there are no ruts to argue with. Shoulders, remembering the wall's cool steadiness and releasing it now that stone has other work to do. Hands, which still hold the memory of grain and rope and the iron's small song, loosening finger by finger until even memory is willing to be quiet. Rain keeps the count. Drip from the eave to the board, drip from the board to the gutter, drip from the gutter to the ditch, drip from the ditch to the river. Each one arrives, does its work, and goes, and the city thanks it by becoming a little cleaner, a little softer, ready for the morning. Sleep comes along that same path, unremarkable and exactly right step, by careful step into a room where nothing is asked of you but rest. Now the night is deep enough that streets and roofs and river all share the same simple color. The rain keeps its easy measure, and the city meets it without complaint. You are warm under wool, the blanket holding the last of the hearth's kindness, the straw beneath adjusting to your shape, as though it has practiced for this moment all day. Each breath slows a fraction. Each breath gathers a few more sounds from outside and makes them part of the hush within. Think of the lane as a plain, dark ribbon. The planks are steady islands, slick but honest. The doorstones watch like patient friends. The gutters know their tasks by heart, and the ditch repeats its soft lesson. Everything moves toward ease. Drips from the eaves are beads sliding one by one along a string. When they reach the knot, they fall and the string is ready for the next. Your thoughts arrange themselves like boots side by side, mud scraped clean, toes pointing toward tomorrow. They do not ask to go anywhere now. They are content to be quiet and dry. The day's small triumphs, a sure step, a steady crossing, a place to rest your palm hover once, tip their hats, and fade into the same tender dark that the room keeps for you. Outside, the river accepts what the lanes have given, and the lanes accept what the roofs pass down. Inside, the hearth gives its last comfortable sigh and turns to ember thought. You lie still and let the city be your lullaby. Wood easing, water counting, stone remembering. The blanket grows a little heavier in the way blankets do when sleep begins. You follow the gentle slope down, past the last puddle of wakefulness, onto level ground where the night is firm and kind. There is nothing left to step around. Only rest. Only rest. We hope this quiet step into another time has left you feeling rested. If you've enjoyed it, you're welcome to like, share, or leave a gentle note. And if you'd like more slow walks through history, you can subscribe and join us again. End of script. Sweet dreams.